It was just another quiet morning in Ethan Miller's small suburban home. The kind of morning that felt both peaceful and empty at the same time. The faint light of dawn slipped through half-drawn curtains, painting the living room in soft shades of gold and gray. The world outside was waking up, but inside, Ethan's house felt like it hadn't moved in years. He sat at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee that had already gone cold. On the counter sat a stack of unopened mail, most of it bills or advertisements he didn't bother to read. His life had settled into a kind of still rhythm, predictable, safe, but undeniably lonely for years. Ethan had been known as the man everyone could depend on, calm, reasonable, quietly strong. Friends called when they needed advice, coworkers leaned on him when life got heavy, and neighbors waved at him when they passed by. But when the doors closed at night and the world fell silent, Ethan had no one to talk to but himself. It wasn't that he disliked being alone. He had simply grown used to it. After his parents passed away and after a few relationships that ended without much closure, solitude became his quiet companion. He had learned how to fill the silence, reading old novels, tending to his small garden, or sketching the view outside his window when words weren't enough. Still, there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when he wished someone else was there. Someone to laugh with over burnt toast. Someone who'd notice when his thoughts drifted too far away that morning. As he looked out at the backyard, the grass slightly overgrown, the garden chair tipped on its side, Ethan couldn't shake a strange feeling. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like anticipation, as if something unseen was inching closer, waiting to change the quiet world he had built for himself. He didn't know that by the end of the day, a single knock on his door would do just that. The day moved slowly. Ethan spent most of the afternoon fixing an old clock that hadn't worked in months. He liked repairing objects that had lost their rhythm, pieces that didn't quite fit. Maybe deep down he was trying to fix something inside himself too. As he adjusted the gears, his phone buzzed on the counter. A familiar name flashed across the screen, Claire Thompson. For a moment his breath caught. He hadn't spoken to Claire in almost a year. They had been close once, inseparable. In fact, she had been the light in their college group, bright, kind, full of laughter that made ordinary days feel like summer. Ethan had always admired her, though he never said much. By the time he had realized what he truly felt, Claire had fallen in love with someone else, Daniel, another friend from their circle. Ethan had smiled through it all, supporting them, even standing beside them at their wedding. He had convinced himself he was happy for them, and maybe he was. But some corners of the heart never fully heal, even when you learn to live with the ache. So when her name appeared on his phone that afternoon, a quiet tremor moved through him. He picked it up but didn't answer right away. His mind filled with questions. Why is she calling? Is everything okay? Should I even pick up? But before he could decide, the ringing stopped. A second later, a message appeared. Hey, Ethan, are you home this evening? Daniel and I wanted to drop by if that's okay. He read the message twice, unsure how to respond. They hadn't visited in ages. What could they possibly want now? Still, his fingers typed almost automatically. Sure, I'll be here. He hit send before he could change his mind. As the sun began to set, the soft orange glow filled the house. Ethan tidied up, not out of necessity, but nervous energy. He straightened the cushions on the couch, rearranged the books on the coffee table, and even lit a small candle that smelled faintly of cedar and vanilla. He told himself it didn't mean anything. Old friends visiting, nothing more. But something inside him whispered that this meeting wouldn't be ordinary. When the clock struck 7, there was a knock on the door. Ethan froze for a second, listening to the sound echo softly through the hallway. It was a gentle knock, but steady, the kind that carried hesitation behind it. He opened the door. There they stood, Claire and Daniel, framed by the evening light. They looked almost exactly as he remembered them, but something was different. Daniel's eyes seemed tired, his smile forced. Claire, on the other hand, looked fragile, like someone holding back tears that hadn't yet fallen. Hey, Claire said softly, her voice a mixture of warmth and uncertainty. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" Ethan nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, too long." They stepped inside. The moment they did, the air in the room changed heavy with something unspoken. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was as if a storm was quietly gathering between them. Waiting for the right moment to break, they sat down in the living room, the candle flickering faintly between them. For a long while, no one spoke. Then Daniel cleared his throat, glancing at Claire before saying, "We came here because we need to ask you something. Something important." Ethan looked between them, his curiosity sharpening. There was emotion in their eyes, a mix of fear, trust, and something else he couldn't quite name. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Claire opened her mouth to speak and then stopped, her eyes glistening under the soft light. When she finally found her words, they came out trembling but sure. "Ethan," she whispered, "we wouldn't be here if it wasn't serious. But what we're about to ask might change everything." And in that instant, the silence between them deepened, the kind of silence that comes right before life takes a turn you never expected. The air in the living room felt strangely heavy, filled with the quiet hum of memories waiting to surface. As Claire and Daniel sat across from him, Ethan could feel the pull of the past, all the laughter, the long nights of shared dreams, and the unspoken things that had once lived between them. He hadn't seen them like this in a long time. There was a gentleness to their presence, but also a layer of strain, as if time had carved lines in places where love used to rest easily. Ethan tried to smile, to break the silence. "It's been forever since we've all been in the same room. I still remember that old diner near campus where you two told me you were officially together." Claire smiled faintly, her eyes softening at the memory. "The one with a broken jukebox?" "Yeah," Ethan chuckled, the warmth of nostalgia flickering in his chest. "You played that one song over and over again, the one Daniel said would be your song?" Daniel laughed quietly. "I can't believe you remember that." "I remember a lot of things," Ethan said, his tone lighter than the ache that followed. It was strange how memories could feel both close and distant at once. Like old photographs left in sunlight. Edges fading, but the image still clear enough to make your heart tighten. Back in college, the three of them had been inseparable. Ethan, the quiet thinker. Daniel, the confident dreamer. And Claire, the bridge between their worlds. She had a way of understanding both. Daniel's passion and Ethan's calm. Ethan had always been drawn to her light, not in a way that demanded anything, but in quiet admiration. She made everything around her feel alive. When she laughed, the world seemed brighter. When she was sad, even the air around her felt heavy. They had spent countless evenings walking back from late-night study sessions, talking about life and the future. Ethan still remembered the night she confessed she was scared of failing, not in school, but in life. "I just don't want to wake up one day and realize I lived safely instead of fully," she had said, her voice soft against the sound of crickets. He'd looked at her and smiled. "If there's anyone who lived fully, it's you, Claire." She had smiled back that quiet, knowing smile, and for a moment he had almost told her what he felt. But before he could, Daniel had arrived, jogging down the path with his usual charm and easy grin. And just like that, the moment had passed. Now, sitting together years later, Ethan could still feel the echo of that lost opportunity. Not regret, exactly, more like an understanding that life had made its choices for them. Claire looked around his living room, her gaze lingering on the shelves filled with books and framed sketches. "You still draw?" she asked softly. "Sometimes," Ethan replied. "Mostly landscapes now. Easier to draw what doesn't talk back." She smiled. "You used to sketch people, too. I remember the one you did of the three of us at graduation." Ethan nodded. "I still have it somewhere, packed away with things I don't look at often." Daniel leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You were the glue that kept us together back then, Ethan. You always were." Ethan shrugged. "I just listened." "No," Claire said quietly. "You cared. That's different." The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. For a second, the years between them seemed to vanish, and he saw her as she once was, laughing in the sunlight, teasing him over coffee. Her hair pulled back in a messy bun as she studied beside him in the library. But just as quickly as the warmth rose, reality settled back in. She was still Claire, but not his Dot. Daniel broke the silence again, his tone thoughtful. "Do you ever miss it?" "Those days." Ethan smiled faintly. "All the time. But I think we were meant to outgrow them. Life moves differently now." Claire nodded. "It does. But sometimes I wonder if we lost parts of ourselves along the way." Her words hung in the air like a fragile truth neither of them could avoid. Ethan looked at her, at the faint tiredness beneath her eyes, the way her hands fidgeted slightly as she spoke. There was something behind her composure, something she wasn't saying. For a long moment, the living room was filled only with the faint crackle of the candle and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Ethan sat quietly, trying to process Claire's words. "Something from the past we never told you." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he watched her carefully, the way her hands twisted slightly in her lap, the way Daniel looked down as if unsure how to begin. Whatever it was, it clearly wasn't easy for them to say. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "Before Daniel and I started dating, I almost told you something. Something I've carried with me all these years." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Back then, I had feelings I didn't understand. For you?" The words hung in the air, fragile and impossible to ignore. Daniel looked up, his expression calm but resigned, as if this wasn't news to him. "I already knew," Daniel said quietly. "She told me before we got married. It wasn't a secret between us, but I think she needed to tell you herself." Ethan blinked, unsure what to say. He hadn't expected that, not from Claire, not now, after all these years. The confession didn't feel like a declaration of love. It felt like an open window to a part of the past that had never fully closed. Claire looked at him earnestly. "I'm not saying this to make things complicated. I needed you to know that you mattered to me." "You still do?" The sincerity in her voice pulled something deep within him. It wasn't longing, exactly, more like recognition. The quiet understanding that two people could carry something beautiful and unfinished without bitterness. Ethan took a slow breath, trying to steady himself. "I don't know what to say, Claire. That was a long time ago." "I know," she replied softly, "but sometimes the past has a way of catching up to us when we least expect it." After that, the room fell into another stretch of silence, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was thoughtful, the kind that made the air feel softer, as though the walls themselves were listening. To ease the moment, Ethan offered them tea. They followed him to the kitchen, where he filled the kettle and set 3 cups on the counter. The simple sounds, water pouring, spoons clinking, seemed to bring a bit of calm back to them all. As they waited for the water to boil, Daniel walked to the window. "You've got a nice place here," he said. "It feels peaceful." Ethan smiled faintly. "It's quiet, that's for sure." Claire moved to the counter, tracing a finger along one of Ethan's sketchbooks. "You still keep these nearby?" she said with a small smile. He nodded. "They help me think. Can I see?" She asked. Tati hesitated for a moment, then opened one of the books. The pages were filled with pencil drawings, landscapes, trees, and faces he'd seen in passing. Near the middle of the book was a sketch that made Claire pause. It was of 3 figures sitting on a hillside, 2 facing the horizon. One turned slightly toward them. The detail was unmistakable. It was them. From their college road trip. "You still kept this?" she whispered. Ethan looked away, embarrassed. "I draw what stays with me." Claire's eyes softened, and for a brief second, emotion flickered across her face, something like nostalgia mixed with gratitude. Daniel turned from the window, his voice calm but honest. "You were always part of our story, Ethan, even when you weren't around." That simple statement carried more truth than Ethan expected. For years, he had believed he'd simply been a friend watching from the sidelines. But maybe he had been something more, a quiet thread in the fabric of their lives. The kettle whistled. Breaking the stillness, Ethan poured the tea and handed each of them a cup. They sat around the small kitchen table, steam rising between them, the warmth of the tea cutting through the October chill. Outside, a light rain began to fall, soft, rhythmic, almost musical. Claire smiled faintly. Remember how we used to sit like this back in college? Rain outside, tea inside, pretending we had the world figured out? Ethan chuckled. We thought we did. Turns out we were just guessing. Daniel nodded. And still are. The three of them laughed softly. But behind the laughter was something deeper, a shared awareness that time had changed them all. As the evening went on, the rain grew heavier, tapping against the windows like an old friend returning after years away. Claire got up to look outside, watching the streetlight shimmer through the downpour. It's funny, she said quietly. When we were younger, I thought love would always feel like sunlight, bright, constant, easy. But now I think it's more like this rain. Sometimes gentle, sometimes stormy, but always moving, always finding its way. Ethan watched her reflection in the glass, the soft light outlining her features, the calm strength in her posture. There was a time he might have mistaken this moment for something romantic, but now he simply felt thankful. Thankful that some connections, no matter how they change, never really disappear. Daniel stepped up beside her, wrapping an arm gently around her shoulders. We've had our share of storms, he said quietly, but maybe that's what makes it real. Ethan turned away, giving them privacy. But in that moment, something within him shifted. The loneliness that had followed him for so long began to loosen, replaced by quiet understanding. He wasn't part of their story by accident. He had helped shape it, even if only from the edges. And maybe that was enough. When the rain finally stopped, the clock had passed 9. The three of them returned to the living room, still talking about work, about the small turns life had taken. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like the world outside his walls had color again. But just as he began to relax, Daniel's expression turned serious once more. There's another reason we came tonight, he said. Something more than just the past. Ethan looked at him, eyebrows raised. What do you mean? Daniel glanced at Claire, then back at Ethan. We've made a decision, and we need your help to face it. Ethan felt that same familiar stir of unease, the quiet warning that life was about to shift again. He nodded slowly. All right. What kind of decision? Claire's voice was soft but steady. One that could change everything for all of us. And in that moment, as thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, Ethan realized that the storm outside had only been the night had deepened, and the rain had left behind a faint shimmer on the windows. Inside Ethan's home, everything felt still, too still, as if even the air held its breath. Claire sat on the edge of the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Daniel had stepped outside to take a phone call, leaving her and Ethan alone for the first time that evening. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy with things both had chosen not to say for far too long. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. He could feel the pull of unspoken words pressing against the quiet. Every time he tried to start a sentence, it caught in his throat. Finally, Claire broke the silence. You always make your home feel so peaceful, she said softly. It's like time slows down here. Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe it's because not much happens here to speed it up. She laughed quietly, though there was sadness in her voice. You were always like this? Calm even when everything around you was falling apart. He looked at her, studying her expression. The years hadn't dimmed her warmth, but there was something different now. A kind of tiredness in her eyes that came only from loving deeply and hurting quietly. You seem distant, Ethan said gently. Not just tonight. Maybe even from yourself. Claire hesitated, then nodded slowly. It's been a hard year. We've been trying to find our way back to something that feels like love again. But sometimes I wonder if we're just chasing the ghost of who we used to be. Her honesty surprised him, though he could tell it came from a place of quiet exhaustion, not blame. Ethan wanted to offer comfort. but the right words felt too fragile to touch. "I know what you mean," he said after a moment. "It's strange how love can stay alive in the smallest ways, even when everything else changes. But sometimes holding on too tightly can make it harder to breathe." She looked at him, her eyes meeting his, steady, open, vulnerable. "That's exactly how it feels." For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The sound of rain dripping from the gutters outside filled the space between them. Ethan glanced toward the candle still burning on the table. Its flame flickered softly, casting moving shadows on the wall, like fragments of old memories come alive. He thought of the first time he realized he loved her years ago, when she had fallen asleep during a study session, her notebook still open beside her. He'd looked at her then, her head resting on her arm, and understood that love could be quiet. It didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply arrived and stayed. But he had buried that feeling, to respect for her, for Daniel, for the friendship that had once meant everything. He had never spoken of it, and over time it had faded into something softer. Not gone, but settled. A memory that no longer hurt, only reminded him of who he had been. Now sitting across from her again, those feelings stirred faintly, like embers catching light from the past. Claire exhaled slowly. "Do you ever think about the people we used to be?" "All the time," Ethan replied. "But I think we were meant to become who we are now, even if it hurts a little." She smiled faintly, though her eyes shimmered. "You always say the right things." He shook his head. "Not always. Sometimes I stay quiet when I shouldn't." Her gaze lingered on him, like when Ethan hesitated. The words hovered on his tongue like "when I should." Days passed after that rainy evening, but the memory refused to fade. Ethan found himself replaying every detail, the way Claire's voice trembled when she spoke, the way Daniel's eyes had held quiet sadness, and the way the moment had ended with a simple goodbye that somehow felt unfinished. He tried to distract himself. Work filled his days, old routines filled his evenings, but the silence of his home grew louder. The clock on the wall ticked endlessly, as if reminding him that time could move forward even when hearts did not. One evening, as the sky dimmed into soft shades of lavender and gold, Ethan stood by his window, staring out at the quiet street below. The rain had stopped days ago, but the smell of damp earth still lingered in the air. Somewhere in the distance he heard laughter, the kind that made him ache without knowing why. He picked up his phone several times that week, each time opening Claire's contact, then closing it again. There were words he wanted to say, needed to say, but fear kept him silent. Fear of breaking something fragile. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being too late. Then, one afternoon, he received a message that made his heart pause. "Claire, can we talk? It's just us. It's important." Ethan read the message twice. His hands felt suddenly heavy, his heartbeat uneven. He typed a simple reply. "Ethan, of course." "Where?" She suggested a small coffee shop on the edge of town, a quiet place they used to visit years ago. Ethan hadn't been there since. It was where they once spent an entire afternoon talking about dreams, back when everything between them was still innocent and possible. The next day, as Ethan pushed open the door of the cafe, the soft chime of the bell above it brought back a rush of memories. The smell of roasted coffee beans, the sound of gentle chatter, the familiar table by the window where sunlight always fell just right. And there she was, Claire, sitting at that same table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, her gaze distant until she looked up and saw him. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," he replied, trying to steady his voice. He sat across from her. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was full, almost sacred. Then Claire drew a deep breath, as if preparing to unburden something that had lived too long inside her. "I didn't know how else to say this," she began, her voice quiet but clear. "Daniel and I decided to separate, for real, this time." Ethan blinked, caught between shock and empathy. "I'm sorry," he said carefully. "I know that can't be easy." "It's not," she admitted, her eyes glistening. "But I think we both knew it was time. We stopped being us a long time ago. We just didn't want to admit it." Ethan nodded slowly. He could feel the weight in her words, not just sadness, but relief too. Like she was finally exhaling after holding her breath for years. "I don't know what happens next," she said, stirring her tea absently. "I feel lost, but at the same time, lighter. Like I'm starting over even if I don't know how." Ethan watched her, his chest tightening. There were so many things he wanted to say: that she deserved peace, that she had always been stronger than she believed, but all that came out was, "You're going to be okay." She smiled faintly. "I hope so. But Ethan?" Her voice trailed off, trembling just slightly. "There's something else." He leaned forward, his heart thudding. "What is it?" She looked down for a moment, then met his gaze, and for the first time in years, he saw something raw and unguarded in her eyes. "You once said that some things don't need to be spoken to be true, but I think I need to say this one." Ethan held his breath. "I think a part of me has always loved you," she said softly. "Not in a way that was ever meant to ruin anything, but in the quiet way you love someone who makes you feel seen. And I think that's why it always hurt, even when I didn't understand why." Her words landed like a quiet storm, not loud, not chaotic, but deep enough to shake the ground beneath him. Ethan's throat tightened. He had imagined hearing those words for years. But now that they had been spoken, he didn't feel the rush of joy he once expected. Instead, he felt something gentler, something almost sacred. "Claire," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You don't know how many times I've wanted to say that too. But I didn't, because I didn't want to take away what you already had. You were happy then, and that was enough for me." She blinked, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. "You always put everyone else first, Ethan, even when it meant breaking your own heart." He shook his head softly. It wasn't breaking, it was waiting. Maybe for a moment like this, where everything could finally be said without hurting anyone. For a while, they sat in silence. The sun had dipped lower, and the cafe had begun to empty. The light through the window turned golden, wrapping them both in a kind of stillness that words couldn't touch. Claire smiled through her tears. "So, what do we do now?" Ethan looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Maybe nothing. Maybe we just let time do what it's supposed to. We've both been holding on to the past for too long. Maybe it's time to stop running from what we feel, even if it just means understanding it." She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "Understanding. I like that." Then she reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. Not a promise, not a beginning, but a quiet acknowledgement that they had finally found the courage to be honest as they walked out into the cool evening air. The sky was painted in hues of pink and silver. The wind carried the faint scent of rain and something new, something like hope. They stood for a moment at the curb, neither ready to say goodbye. "Thank you," Claire whispered. "For what?" "For always being the one person who never turned away." Ethan smiled softly. "Some people are just meant to stay, even if it's in silence." She smiled back, eyes warm, and for the first time in years, her laughter sounded free. And as Ethan watched her walk away down the quiet street, he didn't feel sadness this time. He felt something else, peace, and a strange, beautiful certainty that whatever came next would finally be honest. The weeks that followed felt like a gentle turning of a page. Ethan returned to his routines, but the quiet of his home no longer felt empty. There was a subtle warmth in his days, a sense that life could still surprise him even after years of waiting in silence. Claire and Daniel's decision to take a step back had rippled through his heart in ways he hadn't expected. But the tension had softened, replaced by a quiet, patient hope. One afternoon, Ethan found himself walking along the riverside trail he had visited countless times as a teenager. The water flowed steadily, reflecting the sun like a mirror, calm yet alive. He thought about Claire, about their conversation in the cafe, about the words they had finally spoken to one another. There was no urgency in their connection, no push to define what came next, only understanding and honesty. He smiled faintly. realizing that some of the most meaningful moments in life didn't need to be loud or dramatic. They simply needed truth, and he had finally experienced it. Across town, Claire sat in her apartment, a notebook open on her lap. She had begun writing again, pouring thoughts into words she hadn't shared with anyone. It helped her make sense of the quiet ache she had carried for so long. She wrote about Ethan, about the kindness he had always shown, about how their friendship had been a steady light even when the rest of the world seemed dark. It was a light she could trust, she realized, one that would guide her whether Daniel and she rebuilt their connection or walked separate paths. For Ethan and Claire, the past was no longer a burden. It had become a part of their story, a reminder that love in any form was worth honoring. One late afternoon, a soft knock came at Ethan's door. He opened it to find Claire standing there, holding a small sketch she had found while cleaning out her apartment. It was one he had drawn years ago, the three of them sitting on a hill during their last college road trip. "I thought you might like to have it," she said, her voice warm, quiet. Ethan took it gently, his fingers brushing hers for a brief moment. He looked at her and saw that same mix of courage and vulnerability that had always drawn him in. "Thank you," he said softly. "I've kept these memories, but somehow seeing it again feels lighter." Claire nodded, her eyes glistening, not with sadness, but with a sense of completion. "It's funny," she said, "how something so small can remind you that you've grown, but also that some connections never truly fade." They both smiled, a quiet, understanding smile that spoke of trust, friendship, and the kind of love that endured even when circumstances changed. Days turned into weeks, and life continued its steady rhythm. Ethan spent his mornings sketching by the window, evenings walking the quiet streets of his neighborhood, and afternoons occasionally meeting Claire for tea or a short walk along familiar paths. Their friendship had deepened, not by urgency, not by drama, but by shared honesty and an understanding that time could never erase the bond they had built. Daniel, too, found his own balance. He and Claire worked through the complexities of their past relationship, learning to appreciate each other differently. They didn't rush into a conclusion. There was no resentment, no lingering guilt, only clarity and respect for one another's journey. Ethan observed all of this quietly, a sense of calm settling in him that he hadn't felt for years. He realized that love didn't always have to be fulfilled in the ways we imagined as children or as young adults. Sometimes it was about bearing witness to each other's growth, offering support when